The briefing is brought to you in association with Spain. From the wilds of the Atlantic to the warmth of Mediterranean isles, the Spanish coast has something for every occasion. And whether chartering a yacht or renting a more modest motorboat, there's no better way to explore this magical country's lesser-known highlights than from the open water. Listen out for a new summer season of The Concierge on Monocle Radio. Join Robert Bound and friends as they turn navigator for an unforgettable journey along the Spanish coast. From hidden gems to legendary gastronomy, and with the unique drama of the America's Cup in the host city of Barcelona added to the mix, discover why the time is right to take to the waves. The Concierge, returning to Monocle Radio in July. This summer, set sail for Spain.
You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 30th of July 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program.
The court is not self-policing. The court is not dealing with the obvious conflicts of interest. We need a mandatory code of ethics for the Supreme Court, and we need it now.
U.S. President Joe Biden looks to protect his legacy by proposing a series of reforms to the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll also look at the latest U.S. tranche of military aid for Ukraine. After that, we'll head to Latin America. Fernando Augusto Pacheco is here in the studio. And Faye, we've seen some pretty strong reactions so far from the region about Venezuela.
Absolutely. We'll be talking about this and how controversial Maduro's victory have been in the region, plus the defining picture of this year's Olympics.
Looking forward to that, Fernando. We'll also get the latest business headlines, and finally we'll head to Japan for the latest curious mobility trend driving authorities absolutely nuts: electric suitcases. Yes, you heard that right. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. U.S. President Joe Biden may be out of the 2024 election race, but with 6 more months in office, Biden will be busy securing his legacy and, certainly in his mind, shoring up American democracy for whoever the next inhabitant of the White House may be. That effort includes a new proposal to reform the U.S. Supreme Court, which has struck down a series of progressive causes in recent years, from the federal right to an abortion, to also granting Donald Trump immunity from prosecution for official presidential acts, apparently including seeking to overturn an election. All of which is why Biden has now proposed a series of reforms of the Supreme Court. And I'm joined now by Washington reporter Simon Marks for more on this story. Simon, what exactly has Joe Biden proposed, first of all?
Well, it's a very forthright series of proposals, Chris, that was contained in an opinion piece that the president published in the Washington Post before he made his public comments yesterday. And what Joe Biden is essentially saying is the Supreme Court cannot be trusted any longer to police itself. There needs to be a mandatory ethics code that governs the court's activities on a daily basis, forces members of the bench legally to disclose gifts, refrain from political activity, and recuse themselves from any case in which they or their spouses have any conflict of interest. He's also talking about proposing an 18-year term limit on members of the Supreme Court. Remember that members of that 9-strong bench are all serving for life. So every president has to wait either for a Supreme Court justice to pass away or for a Supreme Court justice to decide that for age reasons or physical reasons they simply can no longer continue. Biden wants an 18-year term limit, and he appears to be envisaging a future in which any president would be able to refresh the court every 2 years with at least one new member. The biggest bar that Joe Biden is really setting for himself is the proposed constitutional amendment that he would call the No One is Above the Law Amendment, which would seek essentially to overturn that recent ruling on presidential presidential immunity, ensuring that all future occupants of the Oval Office are legally constrained, as the president puts it, from becoming kings or dictators, because the president argues that decision on immunity means that there are now virtually no limits on what a president can do in office.
Now, Simon, I suppose a lot of the background for this is pretty well documented, whether it is the cases that the Supreme Court has had in front of it in recent years, the immunity case of Trump, or abortion, or student loans for that matter, so many different things that have gone against progressive causes. Also, the conflicts of interest is clearly something directed at Clarence Thomas and his wife, and different things that have happened, Justice Alito as well. But given all that, I just wonder if you could talk a bit about sort of why Joe Biden has done this now. He's been reluctant in the past. Presidents do try typically to stay above the fray out of fear of kind of reducing the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. What changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, Chris. You and I are both old enough to remember an era in Washington in which presidents and congressional leaders very respectfully would have spoken about Supreme Court decisions in somewhat hushed terms, even when they disagreed with rulings that the court was handing down. All of that has changed now. The politicization of the Supreme Court is now absolutely upon us. It is becoming as polarized an institution in the public's mind as any other of the three co-equal branches of government in the United States: the presidency, the legislative, in other words, Congress, and the judiciary in the form of the US Supreme Court. But I think that what Biden is doing here is, first of all, responding to grassroots Democrats who say, look, this is a 6-3 court now, 6 Republican-appointed justices, 3 Democrat-appointed justices. We're in for a whole era of constantly being on the losing side. He's also trying to create an issue that will turn out grassroots Democrats in November for Kamala Harris and down-ballot candidates for the House and the Senate. He wants to try and galvanize grassroots Democrats to show up, even while the president must surely know that these proposals are essentially dead on arrival. I mean, there is no chance at all in America's current political environment of steering a constitutional amendment through not only Capitol Hill, but 2/3 of the state legislatures, which would be required. So there's an awful lot of sizzle about all of this, much less reality in terms of achievable goals, but it's definitely something aimed at getting that Democrat vote out in November.
Just finally, Simon, I do wonder how much you get the impression there that sort of Biden's legacy is on his mind in these last 6 months, and how much of an impact the Supreme Court and its rulings have had on that legacy.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Chris. I mean, there's no doubt that now Joe Biden suddenly is in the final months of his political career. So everything does become about legacy, even though he and some of his top lieutenants were insisting just a few weeks ago legacy wasn't even on his mind. But at that point, he was hoping he was going to have 4 more years in the Oval Office. Joe Biden has been very hesitant to embrace the concept of Supreme Court reform. I mean, he stopped short of openly calling for the expansion of the court, for example. There are some Democrats out there that say the easiest way to fix this is just to add 3 more justices, 4 more justices to the court and expand it to try and restore the balance that previously existed on the bench before Donald Trump had his chance to appoint 3 justices. The Republicans say that would be too cute by half, and they are predicting that calls to pack the court by Democrats will soon resume. So this is Joe Biden trying, I think, to thread the needle a bit, acting to do something about the court, which has stung him and his supporters so badly over the last few months on so many issues, but stopping short of the kind of revolution that some grassroots Democrats would like to see.
Simon Marks in Washington, thank you. Well, for more on another aspect of Biden's legacy, I am joined now here in the studio by Monocle's Julia Lassica. And Julia, we wanted to talk about Biden's legacy on Ukraine briefly, because the White House has just released also another tranche of military aid.
Yes, absolutely. It feels like we're back in the kind of good old days a year ago when they were sort of coming in quite often. Absolutely. So package has been announced, well, 2 packages have been announced valued at $1.7 billion. And one of them, the 200 million one, involves air defence interceptors, munitions for HIMARS, artillery and mortar rounds, including javelins as well. So it's quite substantial and will be a big help for Ukraine, especially now that there's a lot of press on the front line, was reported last night.
Well, and as you say, when you say sort of back to our regularly scheduled programming, as it were, with U.S. aid, I mean, how much did the delay, in your mind, impact Ukraine? The fact that for a long time, for a number of months, they did not have funding out of the U.S., and how much does sort of now the provision of money maybe give them an advantage, at least for the time being?
I think that there's definitely a huge advantage being given. Russia is being helped. This morning it was reported that they're using North Korean rockets now, as we were talking about earlier. And this gives Ukraine breathing space to help fend off this very, very aggressive Russian push that isn't so much being talked about here in the West, but it is increasing in its kind of strength against Ukraine. And in terms of how much it hurt Ukraine not having that aid, I mean, hugely. It was a very, very negative mood for many months, especially in the winter, with energy blackouts and kind of a lack of aid coming through, and Ukrainians increasingly outmanned, outgunned, and just having to cope with waves and waves of Russian attacks without really the resources to defend themselves.
And so what is the mood like now then, could I ask you, based on that? I mean, is there an optimism at this point, or could there also be a sense of sort of this being, you know, the last round of aid potentially at the start of next year? Things could be very different in the United States as well. How much of a worry is that, and how much do you get the sense that Ukraine feels, you know, these next few months are really quite crucial?
I think it's really tense. I think that if Trump comes in, it's actually not that clear. Lots of Ukrainians are talking about the fact that perhaps, you know, he is so unpredictable, and he was the first American president to give Ukraine lethal weapons. He did something that Barack Obama never did. He gave Ukrainians weapons that were never supplied before. So he is unpredictable, and it isn't clear with him. It seems as if almost he wants people to pay up, to pay for their defence. So he was talking about how America is essentially an investment fund for the Taiwanese, for their defence. So it's not clear. It's very tense. Ukrainians are trying to build bridges. Zelensky was on the phone with Trump in a meeting that was orchestrated by Orbán, the Hungarian president of all people. So they're trying to build bridges. And I think that there is this kind of hope that there will be some sort of security guarantee. But yeah, it's very, very tense. And I think there's also a huge frustration, which we might touch on a little bit later, but huge frustration at the lack of Ukrainian ability to strike deep within Russia, where the attacks are coming from.
Just finally, very quickly, Ukraine is also about to get F-16s. Could you just mention quickly what kind of difference that might make?
So actually, I was reading some analysis which said that perhaps it might not make such a huge difference after all, because they're really delaying how many Ukrainian pilots can be trained on the F-16s. Many pilots were tapped on the shoulder to tell them, you know, we would like to train you, but in the end, there seems to have only been funding for a small cohort.
Julia Lisica from Monocle, thank you very much for joining us. Simon Marks as well before that. Now here's Henry Rees-Sheridan with the day's other news headlines.
Thank you, Chris. Anti-government protests are growing in Venezuela following President Nicolas Maduro's claim to have won the presidential election. Opinion polls ahead of voting had opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez taking more than 70% of the vote. Several countries have asked for transparency and proof of the win. A commander in the Wagner Group, a Russian mercenary outfit, has been killed in Mali following an attack by rebel fighters during a sandstorm. Ukraine's military intelligence agency has claimed it provided intelligence to the rebel group that carried out the attack. The military regime in Mali has been supported by the Wagner Group in fighting jihadist and separatist forces since 2021. And Greece has banned the transportation of sheep and goats across the country to try to contain a highly contagious infection known as goat plague. The nation's agriculture ministry said new infection cases had been detected in the central Larissa region and in Corinth in the south. The virus, which does not affect humans, can kill between 80% and 100% of infected animals. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Henry. It's time now for a review of the newspapers and stories out of Latin America. I'm joined now in the studio by Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent. Fernando, we heard in the headlines there the protests that are happening in Venezuela. It's a very tense situation at the moment with Nicolas Maduro claiming victory in the elections, but of course the opposition not recognizing that, saying they have proof, in fact, that they won those elections. And we're also getting, reactions out of Latin America. What's your impression of the latest there?
Well, there is a very worrying kind of climate in the whole region, I would say. And it's interesting here, Chris, that even countries that in the past, not that they were pro-Maduro, but they had some sort of sympathy because of the left-wing, kind of idea. So, for example, Brazil did not congratulate Maduro. I think Brazil, like many other countries, they are waiting. They want to see the ballots. They want more information. But of course, it's very tense. Maduro already expelled diplomats from 7 countries, including Argentina, which is, you would expect that with Milei, but also Chile, which has kind of a leftist leader. So, it's going actually across the spectrum. And we were discussing before, Panama also decided to suspend diplomatic relations with Venezuela. I mean, Panama is a small country, but I wonder if the silence of Brazil, of course the US is being a bit silent as well, I wonder what's going to be the impact as well. So, because Brazil is a very important sort of ally to Venezuela at the moment. But yeah, it is really, really difficult situation at the moment.
Well, what do you imagine? Tell us a little more about that. The silence of Brazil, on the one hand, as you say, it's notable that they did not congratulate Maduro. Maybe they would have done that in the past. But it's still silence compared to others. Do you expect that to change? Do you expect someone like Lula to actually come out and, ask for proof of the elections, whatever he might do? Are you expecting him to give some kind of speech on this?
He has high ambitions to be some sort of mediator in this Venezuela crisis. But perhaps, I think Lula, sometimes he can be a bit too ambitious. I think it is a very difficult situation. So I don't expect any kind of very harsh statements in the next days. But just the silence, it's already a sign that Brazil is also very worried about this.
Well, let's move on to a few other stories. We do have to talk about the Olympics, of course, Fernando. We've been all in on the Olympics here at Monocle in these, starting this week. And you wanted to start with this really incredible picture. Sadly, of course, we are a radio station, so people are going to have to look up this picture. But it is a picture of a Brazilian surfer, Gabriel Medina. Just describe it to us.
I will. What a magical picture here. And I was watching this live, so I did see the exact moment when Gabriel Medina kind of surfed an amazing wave, and he knew he would get a good score. Then he jumped, but it looks like he's floating on air because his position is very erect. And so basically the photographer was Jérôme Brulé. He's from the Agence France Presse. I mean, this picture probably will be one of the defining pictures of this year's Olympics. And as is predictable, it's on the front page of Ogia. They say "Voo no surf," flying on surf. It is a magical picture. And Gabriel Medina, he is one of the biggest sports stars in Brazil. He's got more than 11 million followers on Instagram. He's very kind of handsome, charismatic. He might get the gold medal because he's going to the quarterfinals tomorrow, actually.
It is such an incredible picture with his hand in the air as well. I mean, it looks like it could be photoshopped, frankly, but it's just incredible to believe.
It's a bit surreal. Yeah, if you look at the pictures, like, oh, what's going on? But that's a real picture. I was actually watching it live. It's fantastic. If you did not have the opportunity, just type Gabriel Medina. You will see plenty of those pictures everywhere.
Floating through the air. Well, let's end on one more fun rivalry note, Fernando. So on the one hand, yes, Gabriel Medina might get a gold medal. He's your hope, but you've been having a sort of sporting spat with Japan in the last day or so.
And I have to say, it's a big joke in Brazil that we cannot stand the Japanese at the moment. We love them. I just came back from Japan, love the country. But basically,
love the country, hate their sports.
They're beating us everywhere. I mean, it's incredible. It's been, 3 days of Olympics. They beat us already 10 times directly. At judo, skate. The only exception was actually surf. Because Gabriel Medina did beat a Japanese surfer, Kanoa Ikarashi. But yeah, I mean, we're like so disappointed with the Japanese. Stop beating us.
What is next? Football? I mean, could that? Just imagine.
We lost as well in rugby. There will be volley against Japan on Thursday as well. We're very, very concerned.
Oh,
but well done to the Japanese. But yeah, I'm a little bit sad.
Well done to the Japanese, but not really. Fernando, Augusto, Pacheco, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now here on The Briefing, speaking of the Olympics, our team on the ground in Paris is bringing a unique take on an amazing couple of weeks in the French capital as it hosts the Olympic Games, turning our Monocle lens not just on sport, but on soft power, culture, hospitality, and design, as we always do. Earlier on Monocle in Paris, a special show out of Paris every morning, we discussed a meeting of tradition and modernity which drives the business of Maison Mellerio, the oldest jewellery house in the world. Since 1613, its baubles and crowns have decorated, among others, members of the French court, including the wrist of Marie Antoinette. Today, 15 generations later, the name Mellerio still hangs above the shop, with its current location in the Rue de la Paix. Leading the family's 400-year-old jewellery business now is Côme Mellerio, who joined Emma Nelson at Maison Alliance.
It's a beautiful family story, and actually it's before 1613, because my family come from the north of Italy and was asked by the King of France, François Ier. He was passionate about Italian Renaissance, and he wanted some Italian jeweler to come and to share their savoir-faire in France. And this is how we arrived in Paris at this time. And yeah, we started to make the most beautiful jewelry for all the court in Europe, the court of France, but also the court of Italy, the Spanish court, the court of Belgium, etc., etc.
So tell me a little bit about the most beautiful jewelry. Can you describe what it looked like at the time, what you were making?
Yeah. Actually, at the beginning, it was not the most beautiful jewelry. It was like a goldsmith making, so a buckle for a shoe, something, a pin, and then we decided to create some more high jewelry things with tiaras and beautiful jewelry sets. Yeah.
So tell me, as the time goes on, you become a sort of a central name in Paris and right across the world. And as tastes change, I mean, your business has to change as well, because history does some pretty brutal things to France and to Italy as well. And yet you're still here.
Yeah. You need to change everything in order to not change anything, to stay alive. I mean, so yeah. Before the French Revolution, we had plenty of aristocrats and queen and kings, and after the 14th of July. And the French Revolution, we lost all our clientele.
Literally, you lost them.
Exactly.
Physically, you lost them.
So we came back to Italy for a moment, and then we came back to France, and we started to redesign again, but for different people, for Napoleon I and the first emperor.
So tell us a little bit about Maison Mellerio now, that you have this amazing history, and you have these phenomenal archives with all the designs and all the order books and all these amazing. I mean, you even have Marie Antoinette's bracelet, don't you, with the little cameos on it. Tell us how much that influences the work that you do today, and what your clients are looking for from this.
Yeah, it's inspired a lot, because today at Rue de la Paix we have a small museum where we display some archives, and actually we have the largest archive set in the Place Vendôme area, because we collect during all this time more than 500,000 drawings from the Italian Renaissance to Marie Antoinette to Napoleon I, etc., etc. And we kept everything.
How much do you use those archives for modern design?
every time we release a new collection, it's inspired from a specific period of time from the archives, but with a twist in order to adapt them to nowadays. Yeah.
And tell us now, I mean, there's a huge concentration, especially in France at the moment, to preserve artisans and to preserve, the great métier d'art. How do you make sure that there is a generation and a generation and a generation of craftsmen and women who will be able to maintain the standards of what you've been doing for 500 years?
Yeah, but the Mellerio family was originally at the beginning of the École de jewellery in France. So we decided to create a school, to participate to the creation of a school in France. So like this, we are really close to the good talents, and it's really good, especially in the workshop, to keep our savoir-faire, because it's a savoir-faire that we have since 1613 approximately. So you don't want to lose it, and you want to keep it safe, and yeah, it's really important to keep it.
That was Côme Mellerio speaking to Emma Nelson earlier today on Monocle in Paris. Make sure to tune in daily at 9 a.m. Paris time, 8 a.m. London time, live right after The Globalist here on Monocle Radio. Or if you miss it, you can head to monocle.com to listen back. You are with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Chris Charmack, and it's time now to talk business with Ewan Potts from Bloomberg. Ewan, great to have you on the show as always. We do have some of the latest updates on Europe's economies and how they've been doing. It's something of a mixed picture.
Hello, Chris. I want to start you off with the good news. The Spanish economy is motoring along very nicely. Italy and France are doing okay as well. So this is second quarter GDP data. This is data from April, May and June from across the euro area. And the Spanish economy grew by 0.8% over the quarter. If you multiply that across the year, that is a pretty decent growth rate. Italy, not nearly as fast as that, but it's still eking out some growth. And France managed 0.3% growth over the space of the quarter, which is better than economists were expecting. France, of course, the second most important economy in the euro area. Unfortunately, the picture with the biggest economy in Europe is not so good. Germany's economy shrank by 0.1% over the second quarter. Economists are expecting it to eke out a tiny bit of growth, but it actually contracted over the 3 months. Germany has really been the sick man of Europe when it comes to economic growth, at least over the last few years. And there is a feeling that the German model, which served them so well for so many years, has really broken down. The model broadly being cheap Russian energy, subcontracting to cheap producers in Eastern Europe, and then flogging the stuff to China. Well, all of that has really kind of fallen apart. Of course, the Russian energy has gone. Energy prices have risen hugely, which matters if you're a manufacturing power. The subcontractors in Eastern Europe have grown their economies so much that they're no longer as cheap as they used to be. And demand has been tepid, to say the least, from China in the last couple of years. And that's not even to mention the worsening trade relations between China and the West, which means that, of course, China is attempting to buy less from countries like Germany. So Germany really the sick man of the economy at the moment in the euro area. Also worth pointing out that Ireland is doing particularly well at the moment, growing by 1.2% over the course of the quarter, which by modern European standards, I think you could probably say is pretty fast.
Ewan, just to follow up on that with Germany, I mean, if they are back to being the sick man of Europe, there was always also, of course, the worry and problem that being, Europe's largest economy, it's not just about them. It affects the entirety of Europe. To what extent, I mean, is that still true? Do markets get the sense that, as so Germany goes, so goes the rest of Europe?
Yeah, well, Germany is massively important politically and economically. Of course, there are now 20 countries that share the single currency. So there are lots and lots of others, but the German economy is dominant. The French economy and the Spanish economy, the Italian economy is the next three biggest are important as well. But the Germans carry a lot of weight. And of course, this is all a problem for the European Central Bank. They'll be deciding on interest rates soon. We've had one cut from them so far. They chose to freeze interest rates last time. So the speculation is when they will resume their rate cutting path as we move into the autumn. And of course, for them, and it's not the first time they faced this problem, there is an imbalance between the countries displaying some quite decent economic growth and Germany, which isn't. Of course, it's actually flips on its head from what they've faced in the past, of course, which was the German economy motoring ahead and the southern European economies really not managing to see any growth. So it's the same problem, but a bit different.
And you had just quickly to follow up, what other story from Japan? Some surprising numbers there where price rises are typically a sore subject.
Land where raising prices is frowned upon and seen as greedy. Now, given what we've been through in the West in the last couple of years, it all seems rather hard to imagine, doesn't it? But for businesses in Japan, this is the reality that they face. It's the subject of today's Bloomberg Big Take, which is our deep dive into an interesting subject. The piece writes up the story of the owner of a small company in Western Japan who's been attending classes on how to ask customers for more money. The problem is it's been so long since he put up his prices, he doesn't know how to do it without causing uproar. Of course, for 30 years, the Japanese economy has been stuck in a kind of doom loop of zero growth and zero inflation, with the threat of deflation, something which always scares economists, never far away. But finally, the Japanese economy looks like it's moving away from all of that. Japanese markets are hot at the moment. Stocks have finally surpassed their 1989 peak, and demand is warming up in the economy. But of course, that means that costs are rising for companies, particularly with imported inflation. Although it should be fair to say it's nothing like the inflation we saw last year and the year before over here in Europe. So that is all good news for Japan PLC, but it is leaving a lot of business owners facing some very tricky conversations.
Needing to take something of a diplomatic approach. Ewan Potts, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And now here on The Briefing, we'll be sticking with Japan for a story about how we're all just big kids at heart. Tourists in Japan have apparently taken to using rideable electric suitcases, originally designed for airports, out for joy rides on the public roads of Japan's cities. The trend is worrying enough that authorities are now cracking down and warning tourists that they will be fined for unlicensed electric-powered suitcase driving. I'm joined now by James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor based in Bangkok. You are based in Bangkok, James, but you have seen these electric suitcases in action.
Hi, Chris. Yes, indeed. I mean, it's a trend that's very popular across Asia. And I guess there would have been a time, maybe in the previous century, when this trend and this technology would have emerged from Japan. But actually, it's a Chinese invention. It's a Chinese product, and it's the Chinese taking it to Japan on their holidays that has the authorities in Tokyo all hot under the collar. So the Japanese news agency Kyodo put out a story recently that basically said that several airports in Japan are banning travelers from using these electric suitcases, and then even on the streets of various cities like Osaka, the police have been taking tourists to court and fining them for using these on the streets without the proper permits. So for anyone in Europe and the US who hasn't come across these things before, they're basically like a cross between an electric scooter and a suitcase. It is a ride-along suitcase, so you can be pulling it along 1 minute, press a button, and then basically jump on it and whiz along the airport at about 10 kilometers an hour. But as you said, people have been taking these onto the streets and riding them along.
James, I was going to say, I mean, when you describe it that way, I mean, we do have scooters after all. I'm assuming they're a big thing over there as well. What is the difference here? Why is this sort of driving people more nuts than even scooters do? Although, of course, scooters are a very tricky subject as well.
I guess it's just the next thing to be electrified. I mean, there's a big trend across the world, and particularly in Asia, for everything electric. There's so many gadgets here. We went through the scooter phase, and now I guess it's suitcases. But what I would say is that the kind of pavement quality in this part of the world is not as good as Europe. So in Bangkok here, I've never seen one of these on the streets. they are for the airport. And if you think about it, airports are perfect places to ride these things. All of that open space, all of that, flat, even kind of marble. So it's not something that we see in Southeast Asia on the streets, and I guess that's why they're having a good old time in Japan. But there are two parts of it. There are passengers in airports, in the likes of Japan who don't particularly like walking through the airport and being passed by somebody riding on their suitcase. But I think it is something that we're going to see more and more of. And if you look at the biggest brand that has really populated this, it's called Airwheel. It's from China, and a lot of their products are sold out. I mean, there's a huge market for these, and they're not cheap. I mean, we're talking about entry level, about 500 euros, going up to easily to 1,000. I can just see this becoming more and more popular unless and until they start getting regulated, which surely is coming. Because if you imagine how many warnings and things we have to do when we board a plane, and then people are taking on these suitcases that have got a huge lithium battery in it. It's going to cause all kinds of havoc and delay if everyone's carrying one.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, warnings on the streets are one thing for these electric suitcases, but in the airports as well. I just wonder what your experience has been. You paint a positive picture of them in airports. Have you taken one for a spin yourself, or have you been bowled over by one, I suppose, trying to get to your own plane at the airport?
I feel like it's a potential Monocle story in the making. Let's see what I'm doing in the second half of the year. But I think my experience has been, going through Hong Kong airport and, kind of seeing them. I first started seeing them end of last year, and then you kind of spot more and more of them. And then you think, okay, this isn't a novelty. This is actually catching on. This is going to become a thing. And if you look at them, I mean, they promise to be able to carry people up to 110 kilos, which is, for our British listeners, 17 stone, which is a huge front row rugby player. And some of them you can put two adults on as well. So, I mean, it's not surprising that in Japan they are being classified as motor vehicles, and people need to have insurance and a helmet to ride them. So it is going to be something that airports around Asia in particular are going to have to look at. But there is obviously a mobility angle as well. A lot of airports in this part of the world, I'm thinking Bangkok, you have to walk a heck of a long way to get from the gate to get to the baggage carousel. And so, there are always those buggies that you can get if you're a senior person or you've got mobility issues. But, I mean, for a lot of people in between, perhaps these suitcases are appealing. And it's not just for kids. The people I've seen on them aren't teenagers. They're not young people. They're not those kind of suitcases that parents buy to pull their kids along in the airport. And the technology is improving, as we speak. This company, Airwheel, is marketing kind of an automated suitcase that basically follows you. So you're not riding on it. You have an app and I guess some kind of tag, and you can walk along while this robotic suitcase, trundles behind you. So, I mean, the poor old humble suitcase is going to be a lot more technical in the next few years.
AI-powered suitcases. James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor, thank you very much for joining us. We should also mention at that point that Monocle magazine's upcoming issue for September is all about mobility, not of the suitcase variety, I presume, although maybe James Chambers will get to do that story at some point. That is all the time that we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer. Our researcher was Gunnar Grunlid and Sana Jumani, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.